Today I'm working in Hawthorne East, one of Melbourne's inner suburbs, where I'll be giving some attention to a front garden. The front path is the entrance to someone's home. It's the first thing you walk when you arrive, and the last thing you walk when you leave. It sets the tone for everything behind the front door. The old path has already been half pulled up for some plumbing. Rather than patching it back up, we're going to build it properly and really lift this front garden. While I'm at it, there's some matching paving to do down the side of the house as well. The seasons are shifting. Summer has backed off, and the garden is responding. There are dozens of native correa around Melbourne, and right now most of them are putting on a show in their own subtle way. Early wattles are starting to colour up, and everything is adjusting to the change. It's a good time to be outside, and a great time to be landscaping. The remaining bricks from the old path are in good condition. I'm going to put them aside. They'll be used in a future project in this garden. Hawthorne gets its name from Charles Latrobe, who in 1840 remarked that the native scrub in the area, most likely tea trees and wattles, looked like flowering hawthorn bushes. By the 1880s, it had become one of Melbourne's better addresses. Grand Victorian houses, independent schools, prominent churches. Not old money exactly, more the suburb of people who had done well and wanted to live somewhere that reflected it. Merchants, professionals, people on the way up. The genuinely wealthy tended to be further out in Toorak and Kew, where the blocks were bigger. Hawthorne was aspirational. But Hawthorne East was a different story. While the western end was building its reputation, the eastern end, around Auburn, was digging clay out of the ground and firing it into bricks. The physical conditions were brutal. Outdoor work in all weather, heavy clay digging and kiln heat. The workers lived right next to their workplace in small cottages, essentially within sight of the industry that employed them. There was no minimum wage and no workplace protections worth speaking of. They were at the bottom of the wage scale, earning a fraction of what the merchants and professionals a kilometre away were taking home. Hawthorne's bricks, fired in pinks, blacks and browns, went into the polychromatic facades of the houses and buildings that gave the suburb its character. But the people who built Hawthorne couldn't afford to live in it. When the land boom collapsed in the 1890s, the housing industry went with it. Brickworks closed. Workers who had been buying their own homes lost them as the banks foreclosed. The boom ended badly for the people who had made it possible. It's now one of the most expensive postcodes in Melbourne. The clay pits are parks. The workers' cottages are renovated, heritage listed, and highly sought after. These are Oakley bricks. They have a good story behind them, which I'll get to shortly. Before the crushed rock goes down, I'm going to put some 50mm PVC pipe under the path. When irrigation is run to this garden, it can be threaded through these and pass underneath without having to dig the path up. The ends get taped to keep the dirt out, and leaving a piece of string through each one means any pipes or cables can be easily pulled through later. The levels on this path are quite technical. The property slopes from the footpath down towards the house, and the last thing we want is water washing onto the front veranda. The way I'm tackling it is to change the slope throughout the path, with the lowest point sitting on the main curve. From there, we can slope away from the veranda and tilt it slightly towards the garden bed to avoid any pooling. At the other end, the last section needs to twist to match the slope of the driveway, but I don't want that slope running the full length of the path. It would make it awkward to walk on. The bricks that just got dropped off carry the Oakley stamp and were made about 15 kilometres southeast of here. Oakley has a remarkably similar story to Hawthorne East. A suburb built on clay, with men doing the same hard, dirty work in the same era, under the same conditions. Back in the day, Oakley wasn't some quiet suburb. It was right in the thick of Melbourne's brickmaking scene, all because of the clay right underfoot there. That stuff was so good, they turned the whole area into pits, kilns, and works that churned out bricks for houses, walls, and everything else going up around the city. It was tough, hands-on stuff. One of the main Oakley brick sites had about 60 men working at full tilt, digging clay, mixing it in those old horse-drawn pug mills, pressing bricks by hand, and feeding the kilns non-stop. Then, the machines rolled in, stuff shipped over from England, and suddenly the output went through the roof. That shift from sweat and horses to proper industrial gear is what made places like Oakley tick for over a century. The land was originally sold by a man named Howard Clarton, although he also went by a few other names. He'd married one woman in South Australia, moved to India, married another woman there while still married to the first, moved that second family to Melbourne, worked as a land agent, and never stayed in one place more than 4 years. He appears regularly in court records. The street was originally named after him, however at some point it was changed to Stanford Road. Make of that what you will. The pits got deep, over 150 feet in places, starting as inclined shafts that opened into massive working faces. They were like underground worlds. In 1938, 2 men were working at the bottom of the quarry face when about 15 tons of rock fell from 10 meters above and crushed them. Their workmates dug them out with their hands. The company's inspector testified the quarry had always been worked with reasonable care, and that the collapse was due to an unusual formation in the rock, essentially arguing it couldn't have been predicted. The jury disagreed. It happened that the jury foreman was an old miner, someone who knew exactly what proper inspection looked like. They found the company negligent for failing to properly inspect the face. The coroner asked them to reconsider. They refused. After the war, many of the men who came home weren't willing to go back into the brickworks. And who could blame them? Before the war, there were 34 brickyards operating across Melbourne, employing over 1,000 men. After it, only 600 returned to the pits, because for some, there was nothing else. Now the clay is all dug out, and the works are long gone. The land's turned into parks and streets. But these bricks, they've outlasted it all. They've already done a job somewhere out there, and now they're going into this path for the next stage in life. The Hilux has been on every job for the past 12 years. Today, it passes the baton to a much younger D-Max. It's always a great feeling getting a new work vehicle. It's almost like I get older, but they stay the same age. Every trade has its essential tools. For a landscaper, it's not the plate compactor or the angle grinder. It's the ute. It's there on every job, every day, from the first load to the last cleanup. Everything else comes and goes, depending on the work. The ute is always there. Now, this is a curved path, so unlike straight paving, I can't use string lines to guide the rows. It has to be done by eye. What I can do is set one height line for the first row. Using a level, I can make sure that first row goes in at the correct height and angle by following the string. After that, every row is done off the one before it with a level. No more string. With the first row locked in, it's just me, the level, and a few hours of paving ahead, which is a good time to talk about the Aussie ute and where it came from. The story goes that back in 1933, a farmer's wife from Gippsland wrote a letter to Ford Australia. She and her husband couldn't afford 2 vehicles and wanted something that could get them to church on Sunday and carry pigs to market on Monday. The 22-year-old engineer at Ford's Geelong plant named Lewis Bant was given the problem. He took a 1933 coupe, extended the rear body panel all the way back, strengthened the chassis to carry a load, and the result rolled off the line in 1934 as the Ford Coupe Utility, the first Australian ute designed and built right here in Victoria. I can already feel the outrage coming through the camera. So before any of you American viewers start typing angry comments, yes, the Americans had pickup trucks before this. But they were truck-based, with a separate cab and tray bolted on. What Bant built was different. The tray was integrated into the body of a passenger car, one continuous structure. Australians have argued ever since that this makes it a distinct invention rather than a copy. It's a reasonable argument. Though it's also worth noting that Australians have a long history of claiming things that aren't actually theirs. Phar Lap, the Pavlova, Crowded House, the Flat White, all from New Zealand, and all happily claimed by the Australians as their own. Russell Crowe is also a Kiwi, though in that case New Zealand seemed fairly happy to let him go. Holden followed Ford in 1951 with their own version. The waiting list in the first year was around 70,000, in a country with a population of under 9 million. Ford and Holden traded the market back and forth for the next 60 years, until both stopped making cars in Australia in 2016 and 2017. When local manufacturing ended, so did the original ute. What replaced it were Japanese and American pickups, separate cab, separate tray, and truck-based like the American pickup. The thing Bant designed no longer exists in production, but the word stayed. In Australia, if it's got a tray, it's a ute, regardless of how it's built or where it comes from. Strictly speaking, the Hilux and the D-Max are both pickups by the original definition, but good luck telling that to anyone on an Australian job site. This side area is a bit different to the front path in terms of drainage. Rather than sloping it towards a garden bed, we're sloping it into the middle of the paving, keeping water away from both houses and letting it run down to a strip drain at the bottom. The gate and the concrete beyond it will be redone at some point, but that's not this video. Those bricks we saved from the old front path are going to get a second life here as well. When the concrete gets redone, they'll border it to make it feel more deliberate rather than just a slab sitting there. Unlike the curved front path, I can actually use string lines here. It makes the whole process significantly faster. The string gives me a continuous reference for height and alignment. I still use the level constantly to make sure everything is sitting perfectly flat and falling on the correct angle, but having the string there as a guide speeds things up considerably. To tie this space into the front garden, I'm going to curve the garden bed and border it with the same pattern we used on the front path. The side passage of a house has always been the forgotten space. In the Victorian era, it had a very specific purpose. Coal deliveries came through here, tradesmen came through here, and night soil collection came through here. Everything that kept a household running, but wasn't fit to be seen from the street, came down the side. The front was for presentation. The side was for everything else. As houses modernized with sewerage systems, gas and refrigeration, most of those functions disappeared, and the side passage went with them. It became the place you put the bins, some spare roofing tiles, empty plant pots, an old coiled-up garden hose, and that forgotten bag of potting mix from 3 years ago that now has holes in it. This one is getting some attention. It's not going to be a feature space. It doesn't need to be. But by using the same brick and carrying the same curved border detail through from the front path, it stops feeling like a separate afterthought and starts feeling like part of the same garden. That connection matters. A side passage that ties into the front garden turns dead space into something that actually links the street to the rest of the property. And that's worth doing properly. This path curves for a reason. There's a long tradition in garden design of using curves to change how you experience a space. A straight path is efficient, it gets you where you're going, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a curved path does something different. It slows you down slightly and makes the journey feel more deliberate. There's a shift in mood as you walk. You're not just moving from the gate to the front door, you're arriving. It's a small thing, but the people who walk it will feel it, even if they can't explain why. In the 1880s, a landscape designer named William Guilfoyle, the man responsible for the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, was actively pushing back against the rigid straight lines that dominated European garden design at the time. He introduced curves into Australian private gardens, not for decoration, but because he understood that the way you move through a space changes how you experience it. That idea hasn't changed, but somewhere along the way, it got lost. Melbourne's newer suburbs are full of front paths that nobody really put any thought into. A straight line of concrete from the gate to the door, poured and forgotten before the house was even finished. The curve on the front path isn't there just because it looks nice. It's there because it changes how you arrive at the house. It makes the path feel considered rather than just functional. And when the garden around it is planted, which is the next stage of this project, that curve will become the spine that everything else grows around. And for this garden, it's just the beginning. Autumn doesn't last long in Melbourne. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. The new rig passed its first test and has remained remarkably clean, at least for now. This is one of the biggest properties I've worked on recently, with 60 metres of bluestone pathway and reclaimed brick edging going in. And somewhere in the research for this one, I found out this suburb was legally dry for 90 years. No pubs, no alcohol, nothing. But life finds a way. We'll get to that. This property runs deep, from the front garden all the way to the back. I'm going to be installing around 60 metres of bluestone pathway, large natural edge steppers, each one set individually on mortar. The whole thing will be bordered with reclaimed old red bricks and finished off with Tuscan toppings. As usual, I'll be working solo. Let's see if I've got enough left in the tank for this one. What could go wrong? First things first, I'll set up some string lines to see the levels. I want the path to run flat through this section. I'm not alone out here though. This property has 4 chickens. They stopped laying a while back, But that doesn't seem to bother anyone, least of all the chickens. They follow the digging because they know exactly what it means. Every time I start digging, they're there. Worms, grubs, beetles, whatever the ground gives up, they're onto it before it has a chance to go anywhere. They've worked out that a landscaper with a shovel is worth following. One of them in particular seems to have strong opinions about where the work should be happening, and isn't shy about making that known. Backyard chickens used to be completely normal in suburbs like this. Through the Depression and through both World Wars, a few chooks in the backyard wasn't a statement about sustainable living, it was just how a household ran. They provided eggs, fertilizer, and pest control. Suburbs like this one in the 1940s were still close enough to their farming origins that nobody thought twice about it. Then post-war Australia decided what a proper suburban backyard was supposed to look like. Neat lawn, garden beds around the edges, a hill's hoist. Chickens didn't fit, they were messy. They scratched things up and they made noise at inconvenient times. So slowly they disappeared from most Melbourne backyards, and keeping them went from being practical to being slightly eccentric. Then, somewhere in the last 20 years, they came back. The sustainability movement, the interest in knowing where food comes from, the general suspicion of supermarket eggs, all played a role in this, and backyard chickens started appearing in Melbourne gardens again. The chickens never really changed. They just kept scratching around, laying eggs, and fertilizing whatever soil they were in. The city just came back around to them. Sounds like our bricks have arrived. These reclaimed old red bricks are going in as the edging along both sides of the path. The edging is what gives a path like this its definition. It holds everything in place, draws the line between the Tuscan toppings and the garden beds, between the path and the lawn. Without it, you just have a strip of gravel in a garden. And red brick alongside bluestone. There's something about that combination that just works. The warmth of the red against the cool dark of the blue. They've been used together in Melbourne for 150 years, and they still look right. Some things just do. The whole path will sit on a compacted crushed rock base. It drains well and gives the bluestone and brick something solid to sit on that won't move. The front sections of this path are going to be curved. To get a curve that looks natural rather than forced, I'm laying out a hose and adjusting it until the line looks right to my eye, then marking it in with spray paint. You could also use a power cord for this. Once you're happy with one side, you can use a tape measure to get the exact curve for the other side. Just measure out the width of the path using your painted line as a guide. I also sometimes mark up a stick or broom handle with the width and use that instead. You'll see me do exactly that a bit later on. And here comes the main event. In these crates are 70 large bluestone steppers. These will be the spine of this path. Before the crushed rock goes down, I'm going to put some landscaping fabric over the scoria. It keeps the layers separate and lets water pass straight through and into the buried drain beneath. This entire garden is covered in kikuyu, and if you're not familiar, it's a type of grass, though calling it a grass is a bit like calling a crocodile a lizard. Technically accurate, but leaves out the important part. Kikuyu comes from the highlands of East Africa. It's named after the Kikuyu people of Kenya, who had deep agricultural knowledge of the plant and used it as livestock feed for generations. It evolved at elevation with warm days, cool nights, unpredictable rainfall, and long dry spells. These harsh conditions shaped it into something that's extraordinarily resilient and very hard to get rid of. It developed two separate systems for spreading. Above ground, it sends out stolons, which are runners that travel horizontally across the surface, rooting as they go. Below ground, it spreads through rhizomes, an underground network of stems pushing outward in all directions simultaneously. It doesn't need to flower to spread. It doesn't need ideal conditions. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop. Australia was one of the first countries to bring it in. The first seeds arrived in 1908 from the Congo. They were actually intercepted by customs because the package came in with no label and no documentation. It was completely unmarked. A local botanist grew the seeds just to identify what they were, and once he did, he was apparently impressed enough to collaborate with Australian universities to help establish it across the country as pasture and fodder grass. It was introduced to solve a problem. It then became a different problem, depending on who you ask. By mid-century, kikuyu was in lawns all over Melbourne. It's hard-wearing, drought-tolerant, recovers fast from damage, and stays reasonably green through winter when a lot of other warm-season grasses give up entirely. For a busy family backyard, it has a lot going for it. The issue is that it doesn't really recognize boundaries. It will cross a garden edge, infiltrate a bed, travel under a path, and come up on the other side. Greenskeepers at golf courses spend serious money and time trying to remove it from areas where it doesn't belong, the greens, the fairways, the fine turf zones, while simultaneously managing the rough, which in some courses is kikuyu. The same grass, just in the wrong place. Digging it out before a job like this is not a quick process. You're not just clearing the surface. You're following the root mass down, pulling runners, trying to get as much of the rhizome network out as possible before the crushed rock base goes in. Because if you don't, it'll find its way back. It will come up through gravel. It will work along the edge of a path for years looking for a gap. Given enough time, it will find one. The only way to get rid of it is by carefully digging out all the roots, and 60% of the time, this method works every time. When I'm on a job like this, I like to find something interesting about the area. It gives the work a bit of context. So I looked into the history of Balwyn North. And I have to be honest with you, there isn't much. Farms, then houses. Dairy farms, then a tram line, then more houses. For a suburb that prides itself on being one of Melbourne's most desirable postcodes, Balwyn North has had a remarkably uneventful history. And it's not even really its own place history-wise. It's just the area north of Balwyn, which was named after someone else's vineyard. So Balwyn North is so historically unremarkable that it couldn't even come up with its own name. The only two cultural highlights I could find were these. In 1961, the first Coles supermarket in Australia was built here. And in the early 1950s, John Brack, one of my favourite Australian artists, painted the North Balwyn tram terminus while living nearby. Brack went on to paint Collins Street 5 p.m, which is probably the most recognised Australian painting of the 20th century. So, to summarise the cultural highlights of Balwyn North, a supermarket and a painting of a tram stop. The tram stop painting is genuinely beautiful, for what it's worth. I did find something worth talking about though. In 1928, temperance campaigners turned the area into a dry zone. No pubs, no bottle shops, no alcohol, full stop. The local Protestant churches lobbied hard for it, and they got it. If you lived here and wanted a drink, you had to leave. That's a strange thing for a suburb to do on its own, so I went looking into why. And that's where this story gets genuinely good. Go back to 1916. Victoria, along with most of the rest of the country, brought in something called 6 o'clock closing. Pubs had to shut at 6 p.m. The idea, pushed hard by the temperance movement, was that if people had less time to drink, they'd drink less. It was meant to be a war austerity measure, and it stuck around for 50 years. It didn't really work the way anyone planned though. What it actually created was the 6 o'clock swill. Picture this. You knock off work at 5, you've got 1 hour. So does everyone else. So the entire male workforce of a city pours straight into the pub and tries to drink as much beer as humanly possible before the doors shut. The pubs were packed, wall to wall with standing room only. Men with one elbow on the bar, shouting over each other's heads to get served. It was, by every account, absolute chaos. And here's a detail I love. If you've been to Melbourne, you've probably walked past 100 old pubs and noticed a band of ceramic tiles running around the outside walls, 5 or 6 feet up from the footpath. That's not just decoration, although it does that job too. Those tiles went in because the pub needed to be hosed down at the end of the night. 6 o'clock closing meant an hour of absolute carnage, and then everyone poured out onto the street at once. Beer, spills, and worse. The glazed tiles washed down a lot easier than bare bricks did. So the next time you're standing outside an old pub, look down. You're looking at architecture that was built to deal with how Melbourne used to drink. Women, by the way, weren't really part of this scene at all. Through this whole era, pubs ran a public bar for men and a separate ladies' lounge with its own entrance, sometimes its own toilet, and was kept well away from the swill. This painting by John Brack, called The Bar, captures the scene perfectly. Women could serve drinks in the public bar, they just weren't allowed to drink there as a customer. In some states, it was actually illegal for a woman to be served a drink in a public bar. In Queensland, in 1965, 2 women, Merle Thornton and Rosalie Bogner, chained themselves to the footrail of a Brisbane pub in protest. The police were called, but decided they weren't willing to remove them on camera and told them to have a good night and don't drink too much. The protest made international headlines, and the law changed 5 years later. The bar where it happened is now called Merle's Bar. Merle Thornton was also, for what it's worth, the mother of Australian actress Sigrid Thornton. Which brings us back to Baldwin North. In the middle of all of this, the swill, the tiled pubs, the segregated bars, a suburb full of church-going young families looked at the whole mess and said, "Not here." They voted themselves dry in 1928 and stayed that way for the better part of 90 years. And here's the bit I really like. Baldwin North is named after Baldwin, and Baldwin means home of the vine. The man who founded the suburb literally planted a vineyard on this land in the 1850s. Within 2 generations, the place had banned alcohol entirely. So the home of a vine became the home of absolutely nothing you could drink. It wasn't until 2015 that Baldwin North's dry zone was finally lifted, 90 years later. The most exciting thing to happen here in living memory is that you're now legally allowed to buy a beer. So, that's the history of Baldwin North. A suburb with not a lot to write home about historically, sitting right in the middle of one of the funniest periods of Australian drinking history, having decided to have absolutely nothing to do with any of it, while ironically being named after a vineyard. Whether the boring history and the dry zone are connected, I'll leave for you to decide. With the brick edging in, the middle of the path needs to come up a bit. The bluestone steppers are a very different thickness to the bricks, so to avoid having to make up the height difference with a crazy amount of mortar, I'm going to use a bit more crushed rock to get the levels right. There's a question worth asking when you're working with a stone like this, which is, how did it get here? I don't mean to this property specifically, we just watched it come off a truck, but how did it get to the point where it's the thing people ask for? Bluestone was formed by volcanic activity across the western plains of Victoria, from lava flows and eruptions that happened over millions of years, some as recently as 10,000 years ago, which is close enough to the present that early Aboriginal people in the region almost certainly witnessed some of it. The stone that's sitting on this garden today started as molten rock, moving across a landscape that looked nothing like it does now. When Melbourne was being built in earnest through the 1840s and 50s, bluestone was the obvious choice for construction. It was everywhere, quarried in Footscray, Clifton Hill, Coburg, Brunswick, and all through the inner suburbs that sat on top of the basalt plain. It was harder than most alternatives, resistant to weathering, and there was an enormous amount of it just below the surface. It went into the buildings, the bridges, the jail, the gutters and curving of the city streets, the foundations of some of Melbourne's most famous sandstone buildings, Parliament House, the Treasury, the Town Hall, are bluestone underneath. The grand facades were limestone and sandstone, but the thing holding them up was bluestone. The quarrying itself is also worth a moment. Early bluestone quarrying was done by hand. Workers hammered wedges into natural cracks in the rock to split it, then roughly squared the blocks with a knapping hammer before loading them onto horse-drawn carts and hauling them to site. By the 1850s, they were using explosives, drilling holes, packing them with black powder, and lighting the fuse. The person who placed and lit the explosives was called the powder monkey, traditionally the highest paid and most dangerous role in the quarry. Many men were killed or injured doing the job. It was very much a buy the ticket, take the ride kind of deal. As the bluestone I'm using here was cut by machines, the surfaces are incredibly smooth. To make sure they stick to the mortar and don't pop off, I put a primer directly onto the stone before laying them. I use a mix of bonding agent, cement and water mixed into a paste, then use a small paint roller to apply it. A significant amount of the quarrying was done by convict labour. Quarries at Clifton Hill were worked by prisoners from the Collingwood Stockade. Pentridge Prison in Coburg was built from bluestone quarried on site by the prisoners themselves. They built their own jail. The site where they quarried it has since been turned into Coburg Lakes, where people now go for Sunday afternoon picnics. If you look carefully at bluestone blocks in Melbourne's laneways, you'll sometimes see marks scratched into the surface. Those are convict identification marks. Labourers scratched their initials into the stones they'd cut so they could be credited for the work. The stone remembers things the city has long since moved on from. And then, by the 1880s, Melbourne decided it was over it. Bluestone had started to feel like the wrong material for a city trying to project confidence and prosperity. It was dark and heavy. It was associated with the convict era, a past the city was actively trying to move away from. Fashionable buildings started getting faced with lighter stone, or rendered over entirely. Sandstone and granite became the prestige choices. Bluestone got pushed to the edges, the landways, the back streets, the infrastructure you used without noticing. It stayed in that position for a long time. Still everywhere underneath the city, still in the curbs and gutters, still in the laneways running behind the terraces, but not chosen, not sought out. It was regarded as something to be hidden rather than celebrated. What changed is harder to pin down precisely, but somewhere in the second half of the 20th century, the laneways of Melbourne stopped being the back of the city and started being something people actually sought out. The dark stone, the texture, the sense of age, what had felt oppressive started feeling like character. Cafes and bars opened in lanes. Street art appeared on bluestone walls. The very quality that made bluestone feel heavy and forbidding became the thing that made it feel like Melbourne. It's in the laneways tourists photograph. It's in the gardens of houses like this one. It's on the mood boards of landscape designers and architects across the city. It's once again celebrated like it always should have been. It's the stone that built Melbourne. It's our stone. I've laid a lot of bluestone over the years. It still has a weight to it that most materials don't. And I don't just mean physically, though it has that too. These steppers are all very different shapes, which means the focus is in the spacing and the layout. There's also a catch with these. Because the rock is sliced, the stones cut next to each other end up very similar in shape. Put two of those next to each other in the path, and it looks wrong immediately. So, part of the job is separating the shapes and distributing them across 60 meters, so the whole thing reads as natural rather than repetitive. Get it right, and it looks like it was always supposed to be there. The first thing you notice is how orange the Tuscan toppings looks. It's almost alarming. But once it gets wet, it settles right down and the true color comes through. And when you look closely, it's not just one color at all. There are blues, greys, pinks, creams. It's a whole mix of crushed stone in there. The orange is just the first impression. Toppings hold moisture, which is fine in the middle of a path, but not ideal sitting directly against a building. So before the toppings go in along the wall, I'm running a strip of thick plastic damp course along the base. This creates a barrier between the toppings and the stone. I'm about 4 barrow loads short. Nothing dramatic, but I'll have to come back tomorrow to finish off the last section. It wouldn't be a proper job without at least one trip back anyway. Like my little feathered friends on this job, I'm no spring chicken anymore. My mind and body are starting to ask for a rest. For once, I'm actually going to listen and take a couple of weeks off. And this has got absolutely nothing to do with any good surf that may or may not be happening. Thanks for watching. I really do appreciate all the comments you guys leave. Honestly, thank you. I'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Bye for now. Most properties have one. The strip down the side of the house that's too narrow to be useful, but too visible to ignore. It collects rubbish, grows weeds, and becomes the dog's domain. This one's no different. Old concrete, rubble. It's just dead space with wasted potential. And this one is about to be completely transformed. Brick steppers, Tuscan topping, steel edging, a garden bed, and hedges along the fence. And up top, in a lawn that's already showing where people want to walk, stone steppers to make it official. There's a concrete path to remove first, and with concrete, you never really know what's underneath. It's the first really cold morning in Melbourne this year, which always catches you off guard. My fingers hurt. And now my back's going to hurt, because I just pulled landscaping duty. There's an aircon unit on the concrete down here. That section's going to stay. I'll mark out a quick guideline to make it as neat as possible. There's no quiet way to do the rest of this. Sorry, neighbours. Quick note if you're ever doing this yourself. Before that blade goes anywhere near the ground, know what's underneath. Service is run under concrete all the time. Gas, water, electrical. You won't see them coming and you won't get a warning. Dial before you dig is a free service. Use it if you're unsure. The trusty old wheelbarrow is going to get a serious workout on this job. But it's a trooper. I genuinely rate it. And when I say trooper, I mean that more literally than you'd think. The wheelbarrow was designed for warfare. It's usually credited to a Chinese statesman and military general, whose name I'm going to absolutely butcher here. Zhu Biliang, in around 231 AD. He called it the wooden ox. The problem he was trying to solve was simple. How do you keep an army fed and supplied when you're moving through difficult terrain with a labor shortage? His answer was one wheel, two handles, one person. According to some accounts, a single soldier could carry enough supplies to feed 4 men for an entire month. It was considered such a military advantage that they tried to keep it completely secret. The wheelbarrow was classified information. Smooth. He probably didn't actually invent it though. Archaeological evidence puts wheelbarrow-like devices in China at least a century earlier. There are 2 murals from the 2nd century, including one dated to 1180 AD, showing something you'd recognize immediately. So Liang most likely just refined an existing idea and figured out you could use it in a war. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Chinese design was nothing like what I'm pushing around today. Their wheels sat in the center of the barrow, not at the front, and that one difference changed everything. When the wheel is in the center, it takes the full weight of the load. The operator carries nothing, they just steer. Some accounts suggest a single soldier could move enormous loads over rough terrain, 10 kilometers a day, and some versions were even fitted with sails to catch a tailwind on flat ground. Chinese military strategists reportedly deployed wheelbarrows in a circle as a rapidly assembled barricade, basically a mobile fort, and some versions apparently had weapons mounted directly on them. It turns out that under the concrete path is another concrete path. A path within a path. We need to go deeper. While China had been doing this for nearly 1,000 years, the West hadn't even worked out the wheel part yet. Before the wheelbarrow arrived, the standard solution was the hand barrow, basically a stretcher with handles at both ends, requiring 2 people. The wheelbarrow replaced one of those people with wheel. A simple idea, but it took them a remarkably long time to get there. The first record of a wheelbarrow in Europe turns up in 1222, the purchase of 8 wheelbarrows for the King's Works at Dover, which was considered noteworthy enough to write down. The European design was already different to the Chinese one. Wheel at the front, load behind, operator sharing the weight. Better for short hauls and tipping, which suited a building site perfectly. It spread into agriculture first, then construction, then mining. For 2 centuries, it was still a relative rarity. Not until the 1400s did it become a common sight across Europe. And then came the Industrial Revolution. The navvies, the great canal and railway building gangs of the 18th and 19th centuries. Men who ate extraordinary amounts, drank even more, and moved half the landscape of Britain with a barrow and a bad attitude. The barrow grew with the work. By the late 19th century, metal barrows were being made, heavy but durable. And then came the war. In the trenches of World War I, the wheelbarrow was everywhere, shifting ammunition, carrying wounded soldiers off the battlefield, and excavating the mud to build the trenches themselves. The barrows used were mostly wooden, because wood was lighter and less likely to sink. Metal was needed for more important things. Nearly 2,000 years after Liang adapted it as a military tool, it was still doing military work, in the mud, under fire. Right, strings up first so that we can see what's going on with the levels. This passage drops away a fair bit from top to bottom, and it's not a consistent slope, so I need to work out where the transition's going to happen before the crushed rock goes in. Before the mortar goes in, we need a proper base. You don't put mortar directly on soil. Soil moves, holds moisture, and settles unevenly. The mortar cracks, the bricks shift, and eventually you've got a trip hazard. Crushed rock compacts down into a stable, well-draining base. It gives the mortar something solid to sit on and stops water pooling underneath. That's what keeps the steppers level and locked in place long term. Before I go any further, it's time for some insurance. Having soil and other material pushed up against this brick wall doesn't sit right with me. I'm going to install a barrier to keep the moisture away. I'll touch on Melbourne's rising damp issues a bit later on. These Castlemaine slate stones have been sitting in the front garden doing not much, so they're coming around the back. A lawn up here is already showing a worn line down the middle, people and the dog taking the same route every time. The stones go where the path wants to be. They'll get dug in and set on mortar later. For now, I just want to see how the spacing looks and how it will join into the brick steppers. This sewer inspection point needs to land right between two stepstones. You can cover it with top-in, but not mortar and brick. So rather than starting at the top and hoping it works out, I'm starting here and paving away from it in both directions. I've got a bit of play at the other end to make it work. This property was built around 1920, which means this side passage has been here for over 100 years. For most of the early 20th century, the side passage on a suburban block like this was purely functional. Services ran down it: water, gas, and later electricity. The hot water system lived down here. Bikes leaned against the fence. Garden tools were stored along the wall. It was the utility corridor of the house, the part you walked through to get somewhere else. Nobody sat in it, and nobody admired it. That wasn't what it was for. And that thinking shaped how people maintained it. You didn't need it to look good, you needed it to work. So when the ground got muddy and uneven, you poured concrete. Cheap, quick, and low maintenance. Problem solved. Which is exactly what we found when we got here. A concrete path that someone poured to solve a problem that needed solving. It wasn't wrong for its time. It was exactly right. And it wasn't the only concrete path we found. Underneath that first path was another one. A different era, a different pour, the same thinking. The side passage is a problem to be managed rather than a space to be enjoyed. The Australian relationship with the backyard is relatively recent. In the early 20th century, it was functional: a vegetable patch, a chook pen, and a clothesline. Not really designed, just used. After World War II, that changed. Returning soldiers built homes on new suburban blocks. Lawn became the standard as it was relatively easy to maintain and good for kids. The barbecue arrived, and soon the backyard became a place to spend time in, not just work in. From the 70s and 80s, the garden started to be seen as a designed space. Paving, decking, and garden beds became common. Landscape gardening turned into an industry rather than just something you did on weekends. People started thinking about their outdoor space the way they thought about their interiors, adding furniture, lighting, and plants. By the 90s and 2000s, the backyard was a full outdoor room, often containing kitchens, landscaped garden beds, and water features. Outdoor entertaining became a thing. The backyard wasn't just for work anymore, it was for living. And eventually that thinking made it all the way around to the side of the house. These bricks came from this property. Last year I built a patio here, and these are the ones that didn't quite make the cut. Most were a bit too damaged for that project, but still way too good to throw out. So, we've turned them into stepstones to tie in with the existing brickwork around the property. We chose not to do a solid path for a few reasons. First, we didn't have enough bricks, but also, this passage runs on a pretty steep slope. A solid path would just send water straight down and flood part of the garden at the bottom, which means drains, which means more cost and complexity. Stepstones let the water soak into the soil instead. With a solid path, you're just getting from A to B, but with stepstones, it's more of a garden that you move through. The variation in these bricks with the different sizes, colors, and chips stop being a problem and becomes a feature. No two of these steppers look exactly the same, and that's not a flaw. That's what gives it character. It's time to set the stone path in place. It's early winter and the lawn has just gone dormant. I want to disturb it as little as possible while I dig down for the crushed rock and mortar base. It won't start growing again until spring. The soil coming out of here is really good. It's dark and full of worms, so I'm going to keep it for the garden beds. One thing to watch though, buffalo roots are aggressive. Make sure you get every root out before it goes anywhere near the garden beds, or they'll shoot and you'll have buffalo coming up where you don't want it. These stones are heavy, but heavy doesn't mean stable on its own. Without mortar underneath, any unevenness in the ground means the stone can rock. A rocking stepstone is a trip hazard. The mortar beds them in solid and keeps them exactly where they need to be. Next is getting this garden bed ready. First thing is to turn the soil over, which loosens it up, improves drainage, and gets air down to the roots. There's actually a school of thought now that says you shouldn't turn soil at all, no-till gardening. The idea being that soil has its own structure, its own microbial networks, and every time you put a shovel in, you're disrupting all of that. It's a good theory, except in this case when the soil is completely full of old broken bricks and plastic sheeting. 3 full wheelbarrows of broken bricks came out of this section. You've got to love the thought process of some builders. Just chuck some soil over the rubbish and make it someone else's problem. Happy days. Going in a Waterhousey floribunda. They can be left as a single tree, but it's more commonly hedged, which is what we're doing here. It'll hide the fence, but it also fills the space with greenery and lifts the whole area. They have a soft weeping habit, and the new growth comes through pink before turning green. In a narrow space like this, lighter foliage actually matters. Dark leaves soak up light and can make an enclosed area feel smaller and more closed in. Lighter, brighter foliage reflects light back and helps a tight space feel more open. And there will be a feature tree going into the court and ring. A forest pansy, it's one of those trees that never really stops performing. Delicate light purple flowers in spring, then the new leaves emerge deep red before maturing to a rich purple-green through summer. In autumn they go yellow before dropping, and the whole cycle starts again. I'm still trying to track down a good one. When I do, it'll be the centerpiece of the whole space. Further up near the gate, some climbers will go in along the fence as well. Over time, they'll soften the whole passage and break up the fence line. That's when a space like this really starts to feel like a garden, rather than just a path. Tuscan topping is a crushed sandstone. It compacts down into a firm, natural-looking finish that's permeable, low maintenance, and has a warm terracotta colour that works really well against the brick steppers and the corten edging. This is also the reason I put that plastic strip against the wall earlier. A side passage like this one is often shaded by the house or the fence, so it's the last part of the property to dry out after rain. Moisture just sits there against the brickwork. The longer a space like this gets ignored, the more likely it is that moisture is slowly being absorbed into the wall. Rising damp is one of the most common moisture problems in older Australian homes. Groundwater gets drawn up through the pores of the brick and mortar, the same way a sponge absorbs water. It doesn't really stop at ground level either. It keeps climbing, carrying salts and contaminants with it. Left alone, it breaks down mortar, rots floor timbers, and encourages mold. By the time you see it, the damage is already well underway. The Romans understood this 2,000 years ago. They were using horizontal courses of slate inserted into walls as a physical moisture barrier. Same principle as what went in here, just 2,000 years earlier. The materials have changed over time. Slate first, then bitumen and felt, then polypropylene in the 60s and 70s. What went in against this wall is a simple plastic strip, the modern version of the same idea. And yet, a joint survey by the Royal Australian Institute of Architects, Archi Centre, and the University of Melbourne found that 45% of solid brick homes over 70 years old in Australia have rising damp. Another 25% of homes aged between 50 and 70 years have it too. The plastic strip creates a physical break between the topping and the wall. The wall should already have a damp course built into it, and this one does. But when materials sit right up against a brick house above that damp course, you're creating a bridge. The strip stops that. It's just simple insurance against a problem that takes years to show up and costs a lot more to fix. Most people don't find out until the damage is already done. The Tuscan topping carries through to the front as well. It ties the two spaces together and makes the whole property feel considered rather than two separate gardens. It's a small thing, but using the same material across both areas makes a real difference to how the property reads as a whole. Walk from the front to the side and it feels like one connected garden, not a patchwork of decisions made at different times by different people. That's actually been the whole theme of this job. The side passage was never given the same thought as the rest of the property. Now it has. Same tool the navvies used, same tool the trench diggers used, and nearly 2,000 years after Zhu Liang tried to keep it secret, it's still doing the same work, just with better ties. Work like this is rarely simple. On ground like this, every step leaves a mark, and every decision has consequences, whether you notice them straight away or not. This job is in the leafy suburb of Eltham, in Melbourne's north, a part of the city where the bush still presses in fairly close, and the landscape tends to set the terms for how gardens take shape. This garden is shaped entirely by the hill. There's no separating the two. Every movement through the space is an interaction with the slope. Over time, the areas under pressure start to reveal themselves. Soil shifts, surfaces thin out, and certain lines become more travelled than others. When that starts happening, it's usually a sign that the landscape is ready for a bit more structure. I've done some work here previously, mainly low retaining to slow erosion across the slope. There's also this paved area further up the hill that has become a natural gathering point. One of the new parts will connect directly into that space, which helps everything feel more intentional rather than fragmented. Much of Eltham is shale. Once you get below the top layer, the ground turns hard very quickly. So with the hard shale, steep slope, and record-breaking temperatures, I've definitely got my work cut out for me on this job. On a hill like this, you start to notice where people naturally walk. Certain lines get used more than others, and over time, those areas begin to wear. The surface thins out, especially after rain, and the slope starts to erode pretty quickly. The aim here is not to invent new routes, but to support the ones already forming. These paths are not just decorative. They are working routes, designed to make movement easier on a slope that would otherwise be tiring and unstable. Along some sections of the path, low retaining is needed to hold the edge in place. The first step is digging the holes for the posts and setting them in concrete so that I have something to attach the sleepers to. Eltham sits on the edge of Melbourne's urban spread, but it's never really behaved like a suburb in the conventional sense. Long before houses and roads, this area was shaped by steep gullies, creeks, and dense bushland. The land here resisted easy clearing, which is one of the reasons it stayed relatively intact compared to flatter parts of Melbourne. In the early 20th century, Eltham became closely associated with artists, craftspeople, and designers who were drawn to that landscape rather than trying to tame it. The area developed a strong arts and crafts influence, favouring handmade materials, local stone, timber, and buildings that followed the contours of the land instead of flattening them. That mindset still lingers. Gardens here tend to work with slopes, trees, and natural movement. Paths curve because the land curves. Even today, Eltham holds onto that bush character more strongly than many inner suburbs. Kangaroos, wallabies, and birdlife are still part of daily life in many streets, and erosion, drainage, and access remain real, practical concerns rather than theoretical ones. Working on a hill like this feels very much in keeping with that history. The challenge is not how to dominate the slope, but how to move through it carefully, leaving as much of its character intact as possible. In this section, the main issue is surface movement due to the steep slope. Building one large retaining wall here would require engineering and permits, and it would change the character of the hill. Instead, I'm putting in a series of smaller walls to stabilize the area and create opportunities for planting, which will naturally help slow erosion and runoff. This section is pretty much solid rock, so it's time to get an old friend to give me a hand. The tallest wall is around 400 millimeters. Stepping the slope like this helps hold the ground in place, allows for planting, and makes the area more usable without introducing a dominant structure. The posts are cypress pine, which holds up well in ground contact and works reliably for this kind of structure. Setting up string lines helps keep the posts aligned and gives a clear sense of the path shape before they are set in concrete. The alignment follows the hill rather than fighting it, and by creating a gentle turn, it will help reduce the chance of water building speed down the surface. Once the concrete is set, I'm going to be attaching red gum sleepers to the posts to form the retaining for our path and for the terraces on the hill. They're durable, stable, and sit comfortably in this bush setting without drawing too much attention to themselves. Red gum is one of the hardest Australian hardwoods, which is exactly why it's been used outdoors for over a century. It's dense, tight-grained, and built to take a beating, so it works brilliantly for decks, steps, and heavy-duty retaining walls. It handles ground contact really well, with many red gum species rated Class 1 or Class 2 for durability, meaning it can last decades above and even in the ground when installed properly. It's a stunning timber, rich, warm, and full of character, but how sustainable it is depends entirely on where it comes from. Victoria has shut down commercial native forest logging, so you won't see red gum being cut from public forests like it used to. Most of what's still around is from older stock, private land harvests or plantations, which is why I'm careful to only use red gum from managed sources, rather than old growth or poorly regulated native forests. That's how you protect habitat, holo-dependent wildlife, and the long-term health of these ecosystems. River red gums are incredible trees. They can live for hundreds of years, survive floods and droughts, and even regrow after losing most of their canopy. That's exactly why, when I do use red gum in landscaping, I'm really careful about where it comes from. Freshly cut, the timber is a deep, almost blood red colour, which is where the name comes from. Over time, that rich red mellows into warm browns and soft greys, giving it a naturally aged, lived-in look. If you want to keep the colour richer and more consistent, you can oil it. A good decking oil applied once or twice a year will slow UV grain, bring out the grain, and protect the surface without hiding what makes red gum so distinctive. temperature is getting close to 40 degrees now, and I'm on about t-shirt number 5. I think that will do me today. The tools are actually getting too hot to pick up. The plan for this top section is to create a path linking the driveway to the paved area. It's already being regularly used as a path, so now we're just going to formalize it with surface material, shaping it into a soft, natural curve that feels like it belongs, rather than a straight, rigid line. I want the path to finish at the same height as the paving, so some of the soil will have to be removed to bring the level down and create a smooth transition. In the 1860s, Victoria was gripped by gold rush fever, and places like Eltham sat on the edge of that chaos. Miners, traders, and opportunists poured through the region, turning quiet tracks into rough supply routes, lined with makeshift huts, sly grog shanties, and basic services catering to anyone heading to the smaller goldfields in the Yarra Valley and nearby hills. Digging into this ground now shows how tough it would have been to chase gold here. The soil is shallow in parts, with hard shale and rock sitting not far below the surface, breaking up in studum chunks that don't give up easily. Miners would have swung picks and shovels into this same tough layer, sifting rubble and clay for tiny specks of gold, often for months with nothing to show for it. It wasn't only luck that was needed to find gold, it was brute persistence in an environment that didn't want to give anything up. It was a time of lawlessness, opportunity, and legend, with bushranger tales swirling around anyone moving gold through the bush. Eltham itself developed more as a timber and farming hub than as a major gold camp, but the energy of the rush shaped the district, bringing people, money, and stories that still echo in local folklore today. Even now, that history is still written into the land. The rock close to the surface, the shallow soils, and the way water moves through the slopes are the same conditions that shaped how people worked here more than a century ago. Very little about this ground is forgiving. It rewards patience rather than force, and it tends to resist anything that tries to move too quickly or too aggressively. Working in it today, you are reminded that this landscape has always asked people to slow down, pay attention, and adapt to what is there, rather than expecting it to bend easily to their plans. It's new boot day. They're about to take a serious beating, but look like they can handle it. By attaching plastic sheeting to the back of the sleepers, a simple barrier is created between the timber and the soil. It helps keep constant moisture off the wood, stopping water from sitting against it and slowing decay over time. With red gum, it's almost unnecessary. It already performs extremely well in ground contact, but it does no harm. It's a small layer of insurance without changing how the structure behaves. With the sleepers in place, the focus can shift to leveling out the path. The path is going to be granitic sand, but to help with drainage, a layer of crushed rock forms the base, giving the surface something firm to sit on and helping it hold its shape over time. When it's compacted, the rock locks together, which limits movement and reduces the chance of the path settling unevenly, especially on a slope like this. You might notice the plastic bands on some of the trees through here. These are possum bands. They're used to stop possums climbing up into the canopy, where repeated leaf stripping can stress trees badly over time, and in some cases lead to decline or death. It's a simple, non-invasive way to protect vulnerable trees from ongoing damage. In bush settings like this, repeated browsing can place a lot of stress on trees over time. Reducing that pressure early helps them stay healthy, especially through hot and dry periods like this one. This part of Victoria is stunningly beautiful, especially early in the day. It's cool and still now, but it's shaping up to be another hot one. These rocks will be used to retain the top path. They're granite, chosen to match the existing stone already used through the garden, so the path feels like a continuation of what's already there. Stone works well here because it allows the path to curve and respond to the slope. It makes the edge feel softer and more natural, helping the path flow through the garden rather than cutting across it. The stone edge changes depending on what the ground needs. In some places, it works as a small retaining wall, holding soil where the slope is under pressure. In others, only a few stones are used, just enough to support the edge and keep things in place. That variation helps the path feel informal and natural, rather than reading as a continuous, formal structure. To help hold the surface in place, a cellular-based system called natural paving is being used. It's made by Stroll, a New Zealand company, and is produced from 100% recycled materials. The system sits beneath the granitic sand. Once it is filled, it becomes invisible, but it plays an important role in how the path performs. The cellular structure helps lock the surface together, which limits movement and reduces the tendency for the sand to migrate downhill during heavy rain. It allows water to pass through freely, rather than running across the surface, which improves drainage and helps reduce erosion over time. The product itself is recycled plastic, but it's designed for long-term use below ground, where it reduces ongoing maintenance, repeated material replacement, and sediment movement through the garden. On a slope like this, that trade-off makes practical sense. Although its recommended use is with toppings and smaller aggregates, I've found that it also works really well for granitic sand. If you're interested in finding out more about it, I'll put a link to the product in the description. Look at this little guy, a marbled gecko. They're really common around here, but this isn't the best spot for him. He's a bit cold and slow, so I'll move him somewhere safer before he gets hurt. They're generally seen as a native lizard that helps control insects, but experts think they actually got into Melbourne via transported building materials and rocks from other parts of Australia. That checks out. Seems like this guy hitched a ride in the granitic sand. Granitic sand is a beautiful material for bush settings. Its colour sits naturally in the landscape, it's permeable, and it feels comfortable underfoot, in a way harder surfaces never quite do. It suits gardens like this because it doesn't try to dominate the space, and instead settles in quietly. It also works well with water. Rain can move through it rather than running across the surface, which helps avoid puddling and keeps the path feeling soft and informal rather than sealed and rigid. Visually, it blends in. Over time, it weathers gently, picking up leaf litter, dust, and subtle changes in tone that help it settle into its surroundings. The challenge with granitic sand is that it is honest about how it behaves. On a slope, it wants to move. Heavy rain can slowly pull material downhill, thinning the surface in high-traffic areas and building it up in others. The steeper the ground, the more noticeable that movement becomes. On flatter sites, this is much less of a concern. Occasional topping up is usually enough. Here, with the constant fall of the land and regular foot traffic, it was something that needed to be addressed from the beginning, rather than managed later. That is where the cellular system comes into play. By supporting the sand from underneath, it allows the surface to behave more predictably. The path still looks and feels like granitic sand, but it is far less likely to migrate, thin out, or need regular correction after heavy weather. During very heavy downpours, the top layer will still shift slightly, as it should, but the bulk of the material remains in place, held by the cells beneath. The aim is not to lock the surface in place completely, but to guide how it moves. Done this way, the path stays usable, drainage is maintained, and the material can age naturally, without becoming a maintenance problem in the future. Granitic sand suits areas like this for a reason. Soils around Eltham and through Melbourne's northeast tend to be shallow and variable, shaped by underlying geological material rather than deep loams, which influences how water moves after rain. Using materials that reflect that landscape helps the garden feel settled rather than imposed. The path does not pretend the ground is something it isn't. It works with what is already here. The soil through this area is difficult to work with. Once you get below the surface, it quickly turns to shale and rock, which makes it hard for plants to establish and thrive without some help. For now, some compost will be worked through the soil to start improving conditions, but planting at this time of year would be working against the weather. All planting will happen in autumn, when the heat has eased. At that point, larger planting holes will be dug and backfilled with fresh compost and potting mix, giving the plants the best possible chance to establish in what's otherwise a very tough location. The local arborist chipped up some dead trees on the property, so rather than letting that material go to waste, the mulch will be spread back through the garden. Mulch is one of the simplest things you can add to a slope, but it makes a real difference. It helps protect the soil surface, slows evaporation, and protects the ground during heavy rain, rather than letting water hit bare soil and run straight off. Over time, it breaks down and feeds the soil beneath, which is especially important in an area like this, where the ground is thin and rocky. Breaking the hill into smaller terraces does not remove the slope, but it changes how the ground behaves. Movement becomes more gradual, water slows down, soil has more opportunity to settle. It also opens the door for planting, which is one of the most effective ways to stabilize a slope long term. Plants do what hard structures alone cannot. Their roots bind soil, absorb water, and soften the visual impact of retaining. Combined with mulch, they help the garden move toward a more stable, self-supporting system, rather than something that constantly needs correcting. The hill is still steep. That has not changed, and nor should it. The goal was never to erase its character, only to make movement easier, reduce erosion, and allow the garden to settle more comfortably into itself. Over time, the materials will soften, plants will establish, and the parts will feel as though they have always been here. Working on slopes like this is less about control and more about understanding. The land usually tells you what it needs. The job is to listen carefully enough to respond with restraint. There comes a point in many gardens where lawn stops making sense. This is one of those places. It's patchy, it needs constant maintenance, it uses a lot of water, and it gives very little back. In a bush setting like this, it always feels like it's fighting the conditions. The plan is simple. Turn it into something productive and more aesthetically pleasing, with structured beds, brick paths, and eventually a small greenhouse. The first question when you strip turf here is what's underneath. Often it's shale. This time, surprisingly, it's decent soil. Dark, with some structure, worth keeping. By marking out the different sections, the layout can be adjusted before any real work begins. This rectangle will be leveled and paved. It will form the base for the greenhouse. A brick path will wind through the center and define the beds on either side. And a brick border will run along both edges to tie it back to the rest of the garden I built last year. We're working on a slope, so the greenhouse base needs to be level. The lower side gets built up, so the structure doesn't sit on a lean. The path and beds will follow the natural fall, which leaves the garden with two subtle planes. The string lines mark the finished heights for the paving. They keep everything consistent, so the path stays flat and even as it moves through the space. Getting these right now matters. Once they're set, I'll know exactly how much needs to be cut out and where material needs to be built up before the digging begins. The paving build-up is 80 mil of crushed rock, 30 of mortar, and about 70 for the brick. So I need to dig down roughly 180 mil below the string lines for it all to fit. Crushed rock goes in first. It forms the structural layer beneath the paving, and most of the strength in a job like this comes from what sits underneath, not what you see on top. The strings mark the finished height of the paving. The crushed rock sits 100 mm below them to allow for the mortar and the brick. That depth needs to stay consistent across the whole area. It's spread evenly, worked into the edges, and checked against the lines as it goes. This stage doesn't look like much, but it decides how the paving will behave long term. The narrow sections under the border get compacted by hand first. The plate won't fit in there, so the tamper makes sure those edges are just as solid as the rest. The wider sections can be compacted with the plate. It does a far more consistent job than a hand tamper on areas this size. The vibration pulls the crushed rock together and drives out the air pockets. This is what really locks the base in. The greenhouse base sits higher than the path and beds below. The lower edge needs to be retained. By measuring down from the finished height, allowance is made for a row of bricks to support that built-up section. It's pushing 38 degrees today, which is not ideal for this sort of work. Once this is compacted, it becomes a dense, stable platform. It also allows moisture beneath the paving to drain away rather than sitting in the soil. These are reclaimed bricks, close to 100 years old. They'll be the main feature in this part of the garden, forming the paths and the borders and tying back to the work done here last year. There's weight to them. Dense, hard-fired, worn from a previous life. Moving them by hand takes time, but they bring a character that new materials just don't have. It's a cracking morning here in Elphin. Good light, cool air, much better than yesterday. The bricks will be set on mortar, giving the path, greenhouse base, and edging a solid, permanent finish. I'm laying this in a running bond pattern, with a border around the edge to match the brick edging used throughout the rest of the garden. This is the part of the job where you're close to the brick. It's a good time to think about what you're actually working with. Almost every reclaimed brick carries a stamp, and that stamp can tell you a lot. These ones read Auburn. The Auburn Brickworks operated in Hawthorne from 1909 through to the middle of the 20th century. The yards sat along Gardiner's Creek, where clay lay close to the surface. That clay built much of Melbourne's inner east. When you walk past the terraces in Richmond or the shop rows along Auburn Road, you're often looking at the same material, fired hard and built to last. These bricks were shaped from clay dug out of the ground and fired in kilns in Hawthorne, then laid into houses and factories that stood for decades. Most of the buildings these bricks went into are still standing. These ones came out of a building that was demolished more recently. Rather than being sent to landfill, the mortar was knocked off and the bricks were stacked, moved, and sold again. When the clay ran out, the pit was filled in and eventually became John Gardner Reserve. If you've walked through that reserve and noticed the ground feels uneven in places, that's why. Most people have no idea they're walking on a former quarry that provided the clay used to build the houses they now live in. So each of these bricks has already had a life in the city. Now they're being laid into a garden in Elphin. The border runs down one side, starting to define the garden beds. What was only string and measurements is now brick and mortar. The curve is set with a simple garden hose. It's flexible, easy to move, and nothing is fixed at this stage. You can step back and adjust it until the line feels balanced in the space. Once the bricks go down, that shape is permanent. A curve adds interest. It softens the area and creates a sense of flow. It makes the garden feel less formal, nor relaxed, almost cottage-like. A space you can move through slowly. A small haven, away from the noise of everything else. They're not perfect. Edges are chipped, faces are worn, but that wear is honest. It shows time, use, and character. You can see where mortar once sat and where edges have been knocked. New materials try to imitate this, but it's not something you can manufacture. It only comes from having already done the work once before. There's something grounding about that. The material has already proven itself. It doesn't need to look pristine to feel solid. Brick is a simple material, but it carries memory with it. It's not about sentimentality. It's about keeping good material in use. Another chapter in a different setting. Instead of a straight line, this border gets a gentle curve. It breaks up the rigidity and makes the edge feel less harsh. Today I get to do my favourite and least favourite parts of paving: the cuts and the grouting. Cuts demand attention. Each one must fit precisely, or the line of the path will look off. The work is steady and deliberate. There is a quiet satisfaction in seeing a triangle come together exactly as it should. Any broken bricks get set aside for the cuts. There's no point cutting into a full clean brick when these pieces already need trimming. It keeps wastage down and makes better use of what's in the pile. The whole bricks stay whole. The broken ones own their place. Cuts demand attention. Grouting demands endurance. One is precise and satisfying. The other is slow and methodical. But without this part, all the careful setting before it doesn't last. The grout mix is similar to the mortar, just slightly stronger. Mortar here is 4 parts sand to 1 part cement. For grout, it's 3 to 1. It's also mixed wetter. That helps it flow down into the joints, but the extra water weakens it slightly, which is why the cement content is increased. The key is making sure the mix reaches the bottom of the gap. It's easy for it to bridge near the top and leave a void underneath. I use a small 6mm mortar smoothing tool to push it all the way down and make sure the joint is fully packed. Once the joints are filled properly, the sponging begins. The cleaner you get the bricks now, the less chance there is of needing an acid wash later. Different sponges behave differently. Some drag more, some lift more. I usually rotate between a few until the surface is clean without pulling the joint back out. Even the sand makes a difference. Brick sand varies from yard to yard. Some sponge off easily, others are much more stubborn. I'm careful about which yard I use for grouting sand. A batch that doesn't sponge cleanly can turn a straightforward day into a really long one. The colour will lighten considerably as it dries, so what you see today isn't the final result. The existing soil had structure and some life in it, but vegetables are demanding. Adding fresh soil as well as compost is about depth and nutrients. Compost improves fertility, but it isn't a complete growing medium on its own. You're building a root zone that can actually support crops. not just keep them alive. A deeper, looser soil profile allows roots to move freely, access moisture, and establish properly. It's not just about feeding the plant, it's about building the right conditions from the start. Fresh soil for depth, compost for structure, manure for steady nutrients. Improving the soil now sets the garden up properly. Everything that follows depends on it. A greenhouse isn't just another structure. It's a way to control the environment. Warmth, light, humidity, in a way the open garden never can. In Victoria, weather shifts quickly. Cold snaps can stall growth outdoors. Inside, air and soil warm earlier and stay warmer for longer, which means seedlings can be started weeks ahead of the season and crops can run later into the cooler months. The enclosure also protects plants from wind, heavy rain, insects and birds. That same warmth needs managing though. Ventilation is essential to keep air moving and prevent mold. Water use becomes more efficient too. With less evaporation, moisture stays consistent, which is especially important for young plants and heat-loving crops. Sitting on the brick base we prepared, the structure is stable and permanent. It turns what was once unproductive lawn into a working space. It isn't decoration. It's a tool, a way to get more from the land already here. Mulch goes on last. It slows evaporation, keeps weeds down, and protects the soil biology underneath. It also buffers temperature, keeping the soil cooler through heat and reducing sharp fluctuations after rain. As it breaks down, it feeds the soil gradually and improves structure over time. Bare soil degrades quickly. Covered soil improves. Paths guide movement. Beds give the space purpose. The greenhouse extends the season. Each element has a job, and together they make the garden work. What was once lawn is now productive ground. The structure is permanent, but the planting will change year to year. That's how a working garden should be. The bricks have already had one life in the city. Now they set the bones for something that will evolve slowly around them. It's not dramatic, it's deliberate, and it will be used. Morning everyone, welcome back. Today I'm laying big, beautiful natural edge bluestone steppers down the side paths and out the front garden. I'll also be pulling up some old brick paving at the front and reusing them as edging to tie in with the paving I did out the back. Then I'll finish it all off using Tuscan topping to fill in between the stones and give everything a tidy, natural look. This video is a continuation of the garden from my last one. But if you haven't seen that yet, don't worry, this isn't a murder mystery. You'll be able to follow along just fine. So kick back, relax, and let's get stuck in. Out the back, I recently did some paving, and now it's time to tie the front and sides together. Big steppers, some rustic brickwork, and plenty of character. I'm taking up the old bricks at the front. They've done their job for a long time, but it's time for a refresh. I'll be repurposing them for the path edging. They'll link the front to the garden out back, where I used the same bricks, so everything feels connected. For all the paths, I'll be laying the stones on a stable mortar bed, which sits over compacted crushed rock. Doing it this way gives you a solid foundation. No wobbly stones down the track, and it'll handle a bit of foot traffic without breaking a sweat. Once the rock and mortar are in, it's all about setting the stones at natural intervals, making sure everything's as level as it needs to be, but still has some natural, organic flow. I'm using string lines to guide the height of the crushed rock. This allows me to get a consistent slope throughout the path. I've put down a crushed rock base about 50 millimeters thick. This base is really important because it gives the whole path a strong, stable foundation. It helps with drainage too, letting water filter through instead of pooling on top, which keeps the stones solid and reduces movement over time. Plus, crushed rock compacts nicely, so the mortar and stones have something firm to sit on without shifting or sinking. It's a simple step, but it makes a huge difference in how long the path will last and how good it looks down the track. Now, you might be wondering, why bluestone? Well, these steppers aren't just a pretty face. Bluestone steppers have a backstory that goes way beyond garden dreams. The stuff is an ancient volcanic rock that forms when lava cools and solidifies over millions of years. Most of the bluestone used here in Australia comes from places like the Victorian volcanic plains. It's the kind of rock that's as tough as they come, dense, durable, and built to last through, well, just about anything everyday life throws at it. When these boulders get pulled out of the ground, they're sawn into slabs or cracked into pieces that keep their natural shapes, so every stepper you lay has its own unique edges and character. That's why you get that natural, organic look in a path, nothing cookie-cutter or too perfect. Before setting the bluestone on the mortar, I like to prime the underside of each stone using a bonding agent like Bondcrete or Bondmate mixed with a bit of cement and water. This step is important because it helps the mortar grip the stone better, creating a much stronger bond. Without priming, especially on stones that aren't super porous, the mortar might not stick properly and the stones could loosen or move over time. It's a bit of extra work up front that pays off by making the whole path more durable and long-lasting. If you're from around Melbourne, or you've just spent time wandering the landways, you've probably noticed those dark cobbled alleys, the ones with character, where plantings, cafes, and history blend together. That's bluestone, used for streets, curbs, and lane paving since the mid-1800s. It started out as the go-to for roads and buildings during the gold rush, cheap, abundant, and easy to cut and haul thanks to convict labour and local know-how. Even the foundations of big-name buildings in town, the Parliament, Town Hall, and some of our earliest public spaces, are bluestone through and through. You'll spot it holding up elegant old churches and some pretty iconic facades around the city. For a while, bluestone fell out of fashion. People found it a bit dark and heavy, but these days it's got heritage status, and folks are keen to keep those original stones as martyrs of history. There's more to the story though. Bluestone has a much older track record. Indigenous Australians have used it for thousands of years, from eel traps and stone houses in Victoria to land markers. There's this amazing eel trap system in Victoria, built from bluestone and still standing after more than 6 millennia. It's not just rock, it's a link to culture, land, and the stories that came long before us. Practically speaking, bluestone nails it in the garden. It's solid enough to stand up to the weather, doesn't get too slippery when wet, and those chunky, irregular shapes mean you can create paths that feel relaxed and natural, not stiff or overly manicured. The surface has a bit of grit too, so even if it rains, they're good underfoot. On the downside, if you're in an area that gets lots of strong sun in summer, bluestone can get pretty toasty. Being a darker stone, it soaks up that heat more than something lighter like sandstone. But for most garden spaces, the good outweighs the bad. Bluestone's pretty low maintenance. Sweep it off every now and then, pressure wash if you've got muddy boots dumping through, and that's about it. If you ever need to rearrange the path or move things around, steppers can be reset pretty easily, as long as the base is right. One thing that makes bluestone a standout these days, besides the look and the history, is that it's actually one of the more environmentally friendly hardscape options out there. It's a natural material, so no need for heaps of chemicals or treatments. And if you're using stone from local quarries, you're also cutting down on transport miles. Plus, bluestone lasts for decades, sometimes centuries, so it's a pretty responsible choice if you care about making something that'll stand the test of time. On this project, bringing in the old bricks for edging isn't just practical, it's a nod to the way Melbourne scrambles and reuses bits of stone all over the place. Sometimes, you find bricks or bluestone in an old garden bed, lever them out, and give them a skin act somewhere else. Brick and bluestone blend beautifully together. The warm tones of the brick complement the cool hues of the bluestone, creating a consistent and harmonious look throughout the garden. So the plan is to keep the bluestone going all the way around the house and down into the back garden. Honestly, it just makes the whole place feel a lot more put together. When I started this project, I wanted each part of the garden to feel like it belonged to the same story, not like a bunch of different pieces thrown together. Using the same stone everywhere might sound simple, but it really changes the vibe. Walking from the side paths into the backyard, you get this feeling like the garden's flowing naturally, almost like the stones guiding you around. Bluestone's tough and beautiful, and it just fits, whether you're stepping out back for a coffee or heading down the path to check the plants. For me, it's those little details, like having the same stone underfoot and having the same bricks in different sections, that make a garden feel like home. It's subtle, but it adds up to something special. If you like the look of these steppers, there's also crazy paving, same stone, but cut or split into irregular shapes and laid out in a random pattern. It's great for patios in spaces where you want an even wilder or more rustic character. Bluestone adapts, whether it's a formal entrance or a winding garden path, it always adds something. While I'm laying these bluestone steppers in the back garden, I can't help but think about how important the backyard is in any home. It's often where we relax, unwind, and reconnect with nature after a busy day. Gardens aren't just about looking pretty. They're little outdoor havens where memories get made, whether it's sharing a morning coffee, watching the sunset, or simply listening to the birds. For me, working in the garden is a chance to slow down and be present. It's not just a project, it's part of a lifestyle I really enjoy. And when everything comes together, the stones, the plants, the garden beds, it feels like a little personal sanctuary right at home. Some people tend to neglect the backside of their garden, treating it as just a utility space that doesn't really need to connect with the rest. But I'm going to build the step for the laundry door using the same bricks that run throughout the garden. By doing this, that area won't feel like an afterthought or just a functional spot. It'll flow naturally with the rest of the garden. Using consistent materials like these bricks helps create a sense of unity, so even the practical parts of the yard feel like they belong to the overall design. It's all about making every corner count. The stones that I'm kneeling on here will be in the lawn, so I'm making a brick edge to separate the toppings from the grass. Let's talk for a second about Tuscan topping. If you spent any time poking around garden paths in Victoria, you've probably spotted that warm, earthy gravel underfoot that looks like something straight out of the Mediterranean. That's it. Despite the name, Tuscan topping is actually an Aussie special. It's made from local sandstone or limestone that's been crushed down into a mix of chunky bits and fine dust. The end result? It packs down solid, drains well, and just gives you this gorgeous sun-baked colour that makes any path or garden bed stand out. One of the best things about Tuscan topping is how versatile it is. It's pretty much a go-to for creating garden paths and driveways. It doesn't get slippery, and it feels natural underfoot. Gardeners also use it as a kind of mulch, scattered around garden beds to help keep weeds down and the soil nice and cool underneath. It's got this relaxed vibe that works whether you're after a modern look or something a bit more rustic. There's a bit of history and a story behind it too. The Tuscan label is all about the vibe, borrowing that classic Italian terracotta feel, but the material itself is straight from local Aussie quarries. It got popular as people started moving away from solid concrete or boring old pavers. Folks wanted something that looked amazing, was easy to lay, and fit in with sustainable gardening trends. Designers love Tuscan topping for its effect on colour. It brings out the green in plants, sets off the grey in stonework, and just generally makes everything feel a bit more lively. Plus, it's easy to fix. If your path gets a bit uneven or you want to freshen things up, just rake it over or add a bit more. It's lower maintenance than you'd think, and way better for water drainage than a hard surface. So, whether it's laying down a new path, topping up garden beds, or just adding that touch of Mediterranean style, Tuscan topping fits right in. That's part of why it stood the test of time in so many Aussie gardens. There's still plenty more planned for the back garden, including laying down lawn, creating garden beds, planting, and mulching. All these next steps will really bring this space to life and help everything settle in beautifully. So, while the hardscaping is coming together now, the garden's still a work in progress, with plenty to look forward to as it develops. That's pretty much the story for today. New steppers, old bricks, and a bit of bluestone history, all tied together in one project. The garden's slowly coming together, bit by bit, with each job linking up with the next. If you've got any thoughts on working with bluestone, or want to share your own backyard path saga, let me know in the comments. I'm always keen to hear what works for others, or what you try differently. Thanks for following along. Cheers, and see you next time. In this video, we're creating a curved brick path that seamlessly connects the patios, steps, washing line, and side gate. Using durable mortar set bricks and the classic running bond pattern with smooth curves, this path combines strength, style, and practicality across the garden. Welcome back to part 2 of our garden transformation journey. Today we're concentrating on laying a curved brick path that will tie together the two main paved areas, the steps, the side gate, and the space beneath the washing line. This path will act as the key connection, bringing unity and a smooth flow to the whole outdoor space. I'm pulling up the old bricks to reuse for the new path. I have no idea how long they've been here. Decades probably, but they've held up remarkably well considering they were just laid straight onto the dirt. Before I remove the old concrete pavers, I'm going to give them a quick pressure wash to freshen them up. I plan to snap a few photos and share them on a local notice board, offering them for free to anyone who might find them useful. This approach is not only practical, but also supports sustainability. By passing these materials on instead of sending them to landfill, I can help others with their projects and keep valuable resources circulating. It's a simple way to support the spirit of reuse and recycling that's at the heart of this garden makeover. As I dig out the old paving and clear away the sand, much of this area will be transformed into garden beds. These new beds will provide a wonderful opportunity to introduce a variety of plants that not only soften the harshness of the hard surfaces, but also add vibrant colour, texture, and seasonal interest to the space. By adding greenery alongside the new path and paving, the garden will become more inviting and balanced, creating a seamless transition between the man-made elements and natural surroundings. The presence of plants will also help to break up the monotony of the paved areas, making the outdoor space feel more dynamic and alive. Beyond aesthetics, creating garden beds here offers several practical benefits. They will significantly improve drainage, reducing the risk of water pooling or runoff issues around the paths. Well-placed vegetation can absorb excess rainwater, helping to manage moisture levels and prevent erosion. Furthermore, the new beds will contribute to a more balanced ecosystem within the garden by providing habitats for beneficial insects, birds, and other wildlife. This promotes biodiversity and encourages a healthier, more sustainable outdoor environment. This stage of the project is all about thoughtfully connecting everything through careful planning and attention to detail. The curved path will not only guide footsteps smoothly and naturally between key garden features, but its flowing shape will bring a sense of peace and rhythm to the space. By setting up string lines at different points, I'm able to measure the varying levels accurately and ensure a smooth, consistent transition that ties all the areas together naturally. These strings mark the exact height where the top of the paving will sit, serving as a clear visual guide. This helps me determine how much soil needs to be removed in each spot to accommodate the base layer, mortar, and bricks. While we're on the topic of the base, here it is now. I'm planning to weigh down 100 millimeters of it under the path. I've covered the importance of a solid base in previous videos, so to avoid sounding repetitive, I'll just say it's crucial for the strength and durability of your path. Whatever you do, don't cut corners here. I'm adding some cement to the crushed rock base to help stiffen it up even more, creating a really solid foundation for the path. The cement binds the crushed rock particles together, which reduces movement and increases stability under the paving. This part of the fence has been broken and needs replacing. I'm going to build a small retaining wall here to hold back the soil from next door. I'll start by concreting in some posts. And I seem to have found a water main. I'll go find the shutoff valve and get this sorted out. It turned out to be the neighbour's water line that the plumber had decided to place on this side of the fence. Fortunately, I've probably got some parts in the car to fix it. Should only be a 5-minute delay. So, back to this retaining wall. I'll set the posts now, and once the concrete is hardened, I'll attach some sleepers. The strings will help line them all up, and I'll cut them to the correct height later on. The weather has turned on me, so it looks like I won't get much done today. Might be a good chance to sneak out for a cheeky midweek surf instead. Now that the base layer is fully prepared, it's time to start laying the bricks. It's not the nicest morning to start the paving. The sky's still a bit grey and there's a dampness in the air. It looks like the worst of it is past though, so hopefully it's just some light showers for the rest of the day. But, of course, it is Melbourne, so anything could happen. I'll keep some covers handy, just in case it turns nasty again. To help set the curve, I'm going to use a power cord. This is a simple trick that lets me easily adjust and test different curve shapes until I find the perfect flow. It helps me visualize how the path will sit in the garden and ensures the bricks follow a smooth, natural arc. It's a practical trick that makes shaping curved pathways much more manageable and precise. I'm using the same bricks as before to maintain visual consistency across the garden. However, this time the bricks will be set on mortar rather than sand. The main reason for this choice is the nature of the site. Sections of the path have a noticeable slope, and sand joints are vulnerable to washing out with rainwater over time, especially on an incline. Additionally, the washing line and side garden are in full shade, which means moss and dirt buildup are common. This area will require pressure cleaning every year to keep it looking fresh, and mortar joints are far more durable under these conditions. Laying a curved brick path is a rewarding challenge. The gentle arcs add an organic feel to the garden. Unlike straight paths, curves invite exploration and soften the geometry of the landscape, making the space feel more inviting and dynamic. Achieving a smooth, even curve requires patience, measuring levels correctly, adjusting the layout, and fitting each brick carefully to maintain the pattern. While it takes more attention than a straight path, the result is a unique addition to the garden and is well worth the extra effort. Once the first row is set, simply follow it carefully with the next one, making sure each brick stays flat and maintains the correct angle. Keep checking alignment and levels as you go to ensure a smooth, even curve throughout the path. I've opted for a running bond layout with a border. This classic brick pattern provides excellent strength, making it less prone to cracking. The border of this new path will match the existing paving edges from the first video, ensuring the whole area ties together. As I lay these reclaimed bricks, I often think about the tough conditions that the workers who originally made them would have faced in 1920s Melbourne. Brickmaking was heavy, manual labour. Workers spent long hours outdoors or in poorly ventilated yards, often exposed to dust and extremes of weather, scorching summers and cold winters. Safety measures were minimal by today's standards. Many workers, including young boys, operated near dangerous firing kilns and heavy machinery without protective gear. The work was physically demanding, repetitive, and sometimes hazardous. Long shifts and low wages were the norm, and factory conditions could be crowded, noisy, and dirty. Despite this, skilled hands shaped every brick with care, knowing each piece was essential in building homes and infrastructure. Holding these bricks now, I feel a connection to those hard-working men and women whose skill and endurance made Melbourne's growth possible. It adds a new meaning to my work, placing bricks that have already carried a century of history, bridging the past with the present. Use and reclaim bricks is something I'm really passionate about. Every brick I lay has a past. It's been salvaged from old buildings or paths, getting a second chance to be part of something new. It's not just about the unique character that reclaimed bricks bring, although that's definitely a big part of it. It's also about making smarter, more sustainable choices, reducing waste, and not relying on new brick production, which has a big environmental footprint. Every brick carries its own little story, and putting them back into use keeps that history alive. To me, it's about respecting the past and making spaces that are meaningful and connected to where we come from. For the washing line area, the goal is to create a seamless connection with the rest of the path while accommodating practical access needs. I'll continue using the running bond pattern to keep visual consistency, along with the matching brick border to maintain a cohesive edge. This section will be a bit wider than the main path, providing enough space to comfortably move around and use the washing line without feeling cramped. By blending the design and pattern with the surrounding path, this wider area will look intentional and integrated, enhancing both the functionality and continuity of the garden. Grouting, a task that feels endless and monotonous, like watching paint dry or waiting for water to boil. It's a repetitive cycle of filling gaps, scrubbing away excess, and repeating. The process tests your patience and sometimes makes you question if there's ever an end in sight. Sometimes, it even leads to questioning a few life choices, or coming up with crazy ideas, like starting a YouTube channel. But despite how dull it feels while doing it, grouting is a crucial step that brings everything together, filling the gaps and locking the bricks securely in place for a lasting, polished finish. I'm using white brick sand along with a specific brand of cement that I know will set white, rather than grey. The aim is to create grout that closely matches the colour of the sand used in the joints of the other paving areas. This helps maintain a consistent and cohesive appearance throughout the garden, ensuring the different sections blend together smoothly. With the variety of cements, sands, and oxides available today, you can create a wide range of grout colours to perfectly match or complement your paving. When adding oxide pigments, it's important to be cautious. While they allow for custom colours, they can also weaken the grout if used excessively. To maintain durability, it's best to add only small amounts of oxide and mix thoroughly, testing a small batch first to achieve the desired colour without compromising the strength of the grout. Now it's just a matter of joining the paving to the pathway, ensuring a smooth transition between the two surfaces. Cutting the bricks is always a part I really enjoy. There's something incredibly satisfying about shaping each piece and slotting it into position. It's probably my favorite part of the job. I'm also extending this section slightly to accommodate the mobile planter box. For this section, which will accommodate the outdoor workbench, I'm going to follow the same curve as the path to keep the design simple and consistent. I'm attaching a strip of damp course to create a barrier and prevent the sand from slipping through the grate. Right now, I'm paving this area on a bed of sand. It's intended for the workbench, but using sand gives the flexibility to lift and rearrange the paving to change the layout in the future. It's a practical approach that recognizes how gardens are always evolving. Gardens are never static. They exist in a constant state of movement and transformation. For example, when a big tree eventually reaches the end of its life, it opens up new light beneath its canopy. That new light allows younger plants to grow and flourish, renewing and changing the garden in unexpected ways. This cycle of growth, decline and regeneration is what keeps a garden alive and vibrant. Just like the paving here, the garden space is designed to adapt and change over time, embracing the natural flow of life. I like to use up any broken bricks for the cuts. It's a simple way to reduce waste. As the path wraps around the corner, it creates a shift in weight that often leads to cracking in paths like this. By cutting a control joint at this point, I'm intentionally creating a weak spot. The idea is that any crack will occur along this joint, keeping it neat and preventing an ugly, jagged crack from forming across the path. For our retaining wall, I'm attaching hardwood sleepers because they last longer and have a better appearance than treated pine. Hardwood sleepers are naturally more durable and resistant to weathering and pests, making them a superior choice. They can be more expensive and harder to work with compared to treated pine. However, they create a stronger, longer-lasting retaining wall with a richer, natural look. When using timber like this, it's important to make sure it was sourced sustainably. Using sustainably harvested timber is essential because it helps protect forests, preserves biodiversity, and reduces carbon emissions, ensuring resources are available for future generations. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed following along with the progress so far. In the next video, we'll be wrapping up this garden by installing the lawn, creating garden beds, and installing edging, along with plenty of soft landscaping. These final touches will help define the space and bring a sense of completion to the garden, turning it into a peaceful and inviting place to enjoy. See you in the next one.